Mutual liberation. If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. Will you join me in a spirit of prayer? Oh, gracious God, help us to become masters of ourselves so that we might become the servants of others. Take our minds and think with them. Take our lips and speak through them. Take our hands and work with them. And take our hearts and set them on fire with your spirit. Amen. Those words that I just quoted are attributed to Lilla Watson. She is a Murray Indigenous Australian, a visual artist, an activist, and an academic. This quote has served as a motto for many activist groups, not only in Australia, but around the world. Mutual liberation. As I understand it, the term mutual liberation is used and it's mostly identified with the work of dismantling systemic racism. That term is used there. It is a stark truth. It is a stark truth for white people who want to, quote unquote, help Black and brown people, that helping comes from often a posture of superiority and paternalism. You know, I have something that you don't, and I want to remedy that, so I want to help. And this is certainly true. As a white person, I have access to health care, to justice, to education, to support that people of color do not have in this country. But to focus on the other without consideration and without humility to my own reality, that is to say, to the idea that I'm sort of like a fish swimming in the waters of privilege, and I don't even know, I'm not even aware of those waters of privilege. It's like breathing air. I don't think about it. I just enjoy air. I just breathe the air. That this reality diminishes my own humanity as a white person. That I am in bondage because of my conscious and unconscious collusion with systems of oppression. If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. So why is my message today on this Earth Day Sunday? Why am I talking about mutual liberation? Well, because I want to explore with you the notion of mutual liberation in what I believe is its fullest expression. First and foremost, mutual liberation is God's will, right? Mutual liberation. The liberation of people who are exploited and oppressed necessarily requires, right, a deep engagement with our understanding of God. It requires a deep commitment and engagement with our relationships with others. And mutual liberation requires a deep engagement with creation. The sanctity and integrity of God's creation are central to mutual liberation. Jesus Christ himself tells his apprentices, his disciples, that to look into the heart of God, they would need to look at nature. So if they wanted to even begin to have some understanding of the nature of God, they were going to have to look at creation. Jesus describes life in an interconnected world where there is enough for everyone. And your life, Jesus says, is part of a single great economy, and that is God's economy, where everything is connected. Christianity often makes the mistake, of course, of narrowing the focus of the journey, the faith journey, as one that is just about personal salvation. You know, my faith is about me and my own well-being and my private spiritual life, and above all, my own redemption. That's what my faith is about. It's about my own redemption, or, you know, sometimes it's referred to as going to heaven. But our scriptures tell us that God creates and loves the whole world of oceans and rocks and plants and animals, and human beings are created to be part of that great harmony. Isn't that a great word, harmony? It's God's world, God's house, not ours. And we humans have been rude and self-centered guests in someone else's house, God's house. We began worship this morning with that threshold moment where we reflected on that simple affirmation from Psalm 24. The earth is the Lord's and all that is in it. Everything is God's first. The greatest spiritual leaders, from St. Francis to Mahatma Gandhi to the Dalai Lama to Desmond Tutu, they've all believed that God's universal love knows no bounds of race or faith or nation or even species. Yes, as Greta pointed out, this is a time of reckoning. Martin Luther King Jr. said, we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, a simple garment of destiny. All life participates in a seamless web of connection. That's what scientists tell us now. And that it's actually possible that the flap of a butterfly wing in Japan can set off a hurricane in the Caribbean. And that driving a gas guzzler in Washington can melt an iceberg in Greenland. In Dostoevsky's novel, The Brothers Karamazov, the spiritual teacher, Father Zosima, puts our interconnectedness this way. All is like an ocean. All flows and connects. Touch it in one place and it echoes at the other end of the world. Love all of God's creation, both the whole of it and every grain of sand. Love every leaf, every ray of God's light. Love animals, love plants, love each thing. If you love each thing, you will perceive the mystery of God. That kind of vision is what moved St. Francis to write his great canticle, his great poem, celebrating brother sun and sister moon. Everything is made of the same stardust. The elements and molecules unleashed by the first Big Bang. So that kind of makes us cousins to a granite rock, a polar bear struggling to stay alive in the Arctic, or a grand sequoia along the coast of California. By contrast, we have been schooled and, dare I say, indoctrinated into a radical individualism. And that kind of indoctrination happens in religion, in politics, in economics, and in business. It is pervasive. The only questions we learn to ask, questions seem to become our default. What's in it for me? What's in it for me? What can maximize my prosperity? Hey, what's going to make me happy? That's what I want to know. And what politicians will improve my life and my pocketbook? The conclusion, the underlying assumption is that, you know what, we're all consumers. We're basically all consumers. And you know, you can see this attitude of toxic individualism in people's resistance to wearing masks. You know, what's in it for me? What, you know, why do I care what happens to someone else? Now, I would say that at St. Paul's, we don't want to ascribe to that kind of toxic individualism. And that we do love the earth. And so what on earth, indeed, what on earth can we do? What can we do? Well, I think St. Paul's needs to testify against the phony consumerism and individualism that leave us more anxious and lonely. Do you remember the verse from Paul's letter to the church in Rome, chapter 12, verse 2? He says, "Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. You who walk the path of Jesus have been renewed. Your mind has been renewed. And we need to testify to that in word and deed. Of course, we're human, and I think we have this underlying forgetting. And so that's why we need to be intentional about testifying against the phony consumerism and individualism all around us. There is an evangelical leader, Richard Cizik, and he is committed to saving the environment. And a few years ago, he had a conversation with someone, and the conversation went a little bit like this. The person asked him, what is the point of the U.S. making a lot of sacrifices for the environment when countries like China and India are only going to make things much worse as they develop. I've heard that. I've thought that. Well, here is his answer. Quote, first, if the U.S. as the most prosperous nation in the world won't lead the way, who will? And second, if Christians won't help lead the way, who will? And then he says, God isn't going to ask us whether China or India did their part, but did you do yours? Whoever loses his life will actually save it. Mutual liberation necessarily requires a deep engagement with our relationships with God, with people, and creation. The sanctity and integrity of God's creation are central to our mutual liberation. Jesus described life in an interconnected world where there is enough for everyone. Your life, Jesus said, is part of a single great economy. The economy of God in which all of nature, all of life is held in God's love. And there is enough for everyone. There are enough resources, enough food and clothing for everyone. But only if we take our place in God's economy and not just in our own. Everything is connected. Mutual liberation is God's intention for us. May it be so. Amen.